Hello, and welcome. Welcome once again to the Secrets of the High Demand Coach. And I am here with yet another high demand coach. That is the one, the only Kim Thompson-Pinder. Now, she is the Chief Visionary Officer of RTI Publishing and host of the Author to Authority podcast. Now, Kim did not write for 30 years after a teacher told her at 7 years old that she was, quote unquote, no good at writing and should stop. Well, then she came to a crossroads and let those painful words go. Since then, she's used words and set them free. She's authored 5 books with 2 more on the way. Most importantly, Kim started RTI Publishing and has helped hundreds of entrepreneurs to become authors and authorities. Well, Kim, we actually met, I believe, through your podcast, if that's correct, Author to Authority. It's just a fantastic show. I got a chance to listen to several episodes before I went on and loved it. I'd highly recommend it. But before we get into all of that and show folks how they can get to you and everything, I'd love to just hear a little bit more of this back. How did you make the leap? How did you go from not writing to writing 5 books? And how did that lead you to ultimately starting this business?
So the story actually starts when I'm 4. And by the way, Scott, I loved having you on my podcast, and we'll talk about that later. But when we were done and you offered me to be on yours, I'm like, I'm so excited to be on Scott. So first of all, thank you for having me on the show. My story starts when I'm 4 and my mom dies. And that was a really rough time in my life. And of course, every little girl wants a mom. Mm. And when I was 7, I had she was this amazing teacher. She was kind and smart and talented and beautiful. And she was going to be my mom. She was going to be my mom. I don't even know if she was married. She had to be married. I don't know. But I thought my dad was going to marry her and she was going to be my mom. And when I was 7, I could also start to write sentences. And I had this incredibly vivid imagination. I was always imagining stories. So I remember the first time, and I don't know if you remember the first time, Scott, but I remember the first time that I wrote something and I handed it to her. And she looked at it and she said, "That's really good." Well, my 7-year-old grieving little heart, that was all that I needed. And I started writing and writing and writing and writing. And I was handing her piles every day. And but it wasn't just that. I wanted her to be my mom. So I was very emotionally clingy to her. Like, I was just overwhelming this poor woman. And I could pretty well guarantee you, back in the late 60s, early 70s here in Canada, they didn't have courses in teachers' college on how to deal with 7-year-old grieving little girls. So in frustration, she looked at me one day and she said, "Kim, stop writing. You're not a good writer." Wow. And of course, my little heart was crushed. And I carried those words subconsciously for 30 years. Now, 30 years have gone by. I'm married. I've got kids. I'm an entrepreneur. And I get my own website. This is 2011. You could do your own website back then, but it was not easy. And I was so excited. Oh, man, this was a bucket list dream come true, my own website. And the gentleman emailed me and said, "Kim, your website's ready. We just have to set up your blog." Now, I'd been reading blogs for a long time, but I didn't know what they were called. So I emailed him back, "What's a blog?" And he emails me back, and I only remember the first few words. It said, "Kim, you have to write." And in that moment, I was like in this God-inspired crisis in my life, because those words from the teacher screamed at me in my head. "Kim, don't write. You're not a good writer." And I stopped. I'm like, wait, where is that coming from? And so I went through a process. I prayed about it. I thought about it. And all of a sudden, this memory came back. And I realized for 30 years, every time I went to write, that thought was in the back of my head. And I had to make a decision. What was I going to do with that? And I finally decided it was time to let those words go. So I did 2 things. I took responsibility for my part. I recognized that I emotionally overwhelmed this poor woman. I also realized that she probably said that to me not because I wasn't a good writer, but she needed me to back off. and I was not getting the hints, and she didn't have the skills to deal with it. So I recognized that, and I also forgave her, and I started to write. And my first blog post took 3 days. Maybe it was 500 words, maybe. 50 to 60 crumpled pieces of paper on the floor later, because back then I wrote everything out by hand and then typed it in. I realized very quickly that was a very long process, and I learned how to type. Still badly, but I can type. And I put my first blog post up, and I asked a few people to take a look at it. And guess what? They loved it. So that was all that 40-something-year-old heart needed, and I kept writing. And then I decided I needed to write books. And unfortunately, I don't have time to tell that whole story because that's a whole story in of itself. But needless to say, almost daily, I almost quit. And because the process was so hard, I had no mentorship, I had no teaching, I had no training. I was doing this all on my own with Google and some courses from Udemy. The computer just about went out the window, I don't know how many times. Okay, my laptop is lucky to be alive. Mind you, this one here is a few upgrades since then. But the only reason I didn't throw the computer out the window is because my husband's a computer guru, and if I'd thrown that laptop out of the window, he probably would have divorced me. So then came books. Fast forward 2015, my son is getting married. That is a wonderful time. But we also had 2 cars that we were driving by faith. So it was a wonderful, expensive time. And I don't know, have you ever driven a vehicle by faith, Scott?
Yes,
have you ever heard of that before?
Yes.
So audience, if you've not driven a car by faith, this is where it is no longer repairable or it's not worth putting money into, but you don't have money to replace it. So you get in the car and you pray that you make it to where you're going to go. You do what you need to do. You get in the car, you pray you're going to make it back home. That was what both of our vehicles were like. So I was just sitting on a freelance site getting some graphic design work. I'm very crafty. I'm very musically inclined, writing. Do not ever ask me to draw anything for you or to graphically design. That is not in my skill set. And again, just a God thought, you should check out writing jobs. And I'm like, yeah, writer now. And I started taking out writing jobs. And because I had done everything in my books within a year, I formed a publishing company because I had so much business coming in.
Wow.
And I realized about 2017, it took a couple of years, but I realized this is what I was called to do.
Wow.
And since then, it has grown, it has changed, it has developed. We have helped hundreds of people become authors. Right now, the only people that we work with are high-level entrepreneurs, professionals, consultants, and speakers. We work with established thought leaders and emerging thought leaders, and we help them ghostwrite, produce, and publish their books that convert readers into clients, and then they use those books to scale their business.
Wow.
And that's how I went from being told I should not write to owning a publishing company. That's
stunning. What a story. What a story. I mean, there's so many things to unpack in there. But I think, while that was your version of the story, I don't think there's any one of us who doesn't carry some of those words, right? There's some words from someone. And one of the things that I've heard is that children are excellent observers and poor meaning makers, right?
Yeah.
We see everything, but we don't have the capacity to make sense of it. And one of the things I loved about your story was the opportunity to come back in and say, let me make sense of what was going on in this situation. It had nothing to do with your ability to write. It's such a powerful story. Now, I want to shift our focus a little bit, especially leveraging kind of your story and the work that you do now. If someone who hasn't written in 30 years can write 5 books, a couple more on the way, then lots of people can write books. Who should write a book?
I think there's lots of different categories of people who should write books. But if we're looking at someone, actually, to be honest, I think anybody can and should write a book. Everybody's story is valuable. So I don't think there's not a single person in this earth who shouldn't write their story down. But where I focus in is on people who want to write a book to help them build their business. So one of the things that concepts that has actually misconcept that is out there in the entrepreneurial space is that you write a book and that all this business is going to come flooding into you. And that is it's an outright lie. Let's just tell it for what it is. It is a lie. Now, does that mean that you can't use a book to build your business? Yes, you can. But it's not a field of dreams where business falls into your lap just because you've written a book. You have to shift the mindset from field of dreams to marketing tool. And so the book is a tool that you use. If you do not use that book, if you write and publish your book and you get a box of books and they're still sitting in your garage 3 years later, no, you're not going to get any results. So it's about getting, first of all, figuring out who's the right person to read that book, your audience of one. If you're going to write a book for your business, you must have an audience of one. Who is that one person? Who is that one person who's going to get the greatest benefit from your book? Mm-hmm. So you have to write the book to them. But then how do you get that book into people's hands? And that's when you use it as a marketing tool. So when you write to the right person and then you get that book in the right person's hands, you will convert a percentage of those people from a reader into a client. Now, there's a process, okay? Yeah, it's not field of dreams. Everyone who reads your book is going to, just email you and go, okay, I'm willing to spend $15,000 with you. No. But what a book does, can I get 3 minutes to explain this, Chris?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, this was going to be my next question, so you're great.
Oh, it's been one of those days. Scott, I want you to think of 2 words, create and scale. We're going to focus in on create today. If you want to create a book that converts readers into clients, your book should create authentic relationship. That's C. If you do not create relationship, people will not move forward with you. So not only do you have to create the know, like, and trust factor, you have to create the I trust this person, I know this person, I believe this person can change my life. So it's not just know, like, and trust, it's know, like, trust, and believe. Mm-hmm. And so when you create the relationship, that's what helps drive people to want to work with you. You've got to reveal the real problem. Most problems aren't what we think it is. So for an example, husbands and wives fight over which way you put the toilet paper roll on. And you think, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, for the wife, the real issue isn't the fact that she has to have her own way and the toilet paper roll has to be put on a certain way. That's not the real problem. That's what they fight about. The real problem is the fact that she doesn't feel loved because he won't change the way he does something because she prefers it that way. He does not love her enough. He does not care about the things that she cares about. That's the real problem. Yeah. Has nothing to do with toilet paper. The toilet paper is just a symptom. So is your book getting down to the real problems and issues that people are having so that it can be solved? Because if you don't know what the real problem is, you're never going to solve it, right? So C, R, E, does your book educate and engage? Do you show in the book that you actually solve their problem? Do you create the book in such a way that you give them opportunities to engage with you? T, is it targeted? If your book is not targeted, it will never be effective. If you write to everyone, you are writing to no one. You need to write to someone. Then E, is the book excellently done? Is it written well? Is it edited well? Is it proofread well? Is it formatted well? Do you have good covers on that book? Because people say you don't judge a book by your cover. Well, in today's 2024 world, you judge a book by its cover. And people will not open the book unless they like the cover.
Yeah.
So when you look at all of those things, your book has to be all of those things if you want it to convert a reader into a client.
It's so good. It's so good. I love the structure of it. I think one of the things that feels overwhelming for a lot of folks is like, write a book. Is this jazzy hands? Like, what do I do? And I feel like that just gives us rails to run on and how to approach it. And I know there's so much more to it, but I love that as an introductory step. There's a question that I have for you, and you kind of mentioned it a couple of times leading up to it, but it's this idea of a publisher. Right? It used to be that if a book was going to get out in the world, it was either published or it wasn't, right? It either existed or it didn't. And now it feels like there are 1,000 different options. So should someone, if they're using a book as a business marketing tool, should they get a publisher? And if so, how do they find the right one?
So I highly recommend that whether you use a publisher or not, you self-publish your book. Now, what I mean by that is that when somebody looks up the book, it is published by you. But self-publish also means that you hold all the rights to the book. As an entrepreneur, consultant, professional, speaker, thought leader, you need to be able to do with your book what you want to do with the book to build your business. So if you want to give copies away, you should be able to do that. If you want to do a second edition because your knowledge has upgraded and you need to change that book, you need to be able to do that. So whether you work with a publisher or not, now I do recommend you do work with a publisher because it makes the process a lot faster. And you're not going to, every author in their first book comes to the point where they want to throw the laptop out the window. It just happens. It's part of the process even when you work with a publisher. Okay, it's like being pregnant and you're in, sometimes when you get to the launch time, you're in labor and you just want to throw everything. It is. Going through a book launch is like having a baby, and it can be extremely messy. It's chaotic, but in the end, you've got this beautiful thing born that is yours. But you want to work with a publisher because there's just so many things that you don't know that trip you up. There's so many things that are going to make your book not effective. Now, I highly recommend that you work with a publisher, but you have to find the right publisher for you. And I will send you the link to this because I didn't think we were going there today, but I have a resource called the 7 questions that you ask a publisher before hiring them. This goes through the things that you need to ask to ensure that you're working with the right person. See, one thing I'm very comfortable with is I'm only certain people's cup of tea. I may not be your cup of tea. I'm okay with that. Yeah. Because if I'm not the right person, if I'm not the right publishing company, and it doesn't matter what you offer or the deal that they offer you, or, they're going to throw in this, they're going to throw in that. Ultimately, if you're not feeling that this is the right person that you can work with, don't. Because you are just going to be so frustrated with the process and the book's not going to be what you want. So it's about finding the right publisher and taking the time to do that. So I will send you the link, Scott, for that resource that you can put in the show notes. I don't have it memorized. Otherwise, I would just say it for everyone. I just don't have it memorized at this point. But I highly recommend you get it. And then any publisher you interview, including if you decide to interview me, you ask those questions. And if they cannot answer them to your satisfaction, then you do not work with that person.
Wow. Yeah.
But self-publish your book. Even if you have someone, like at RTI Publishing, we do 95% of the work. It's done with you in the sense that you have control over everything in that book and every decision is ultimately yours, and we respect that. But we do most of the work on the book. But we help you to be able to get that book out in a timely fashion. But ultimately, our philosophy is it's your book. So ultimately you have to make the decisions for that book. And so that's the biggest thing. You need to control that book, no matter who you work with. Whether you decide to go through the traditional, I don't think traditional is going to work for most people who are writing a book to build a business. Just my opinion. But even if you went the traditional route, you still need to own the rights to your book. Do not let anybody else have control over it, because then you're hindering the results you can achieve.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. So there's a question I like to ask all my guests, and it's this. What would you say is the biggest secret that you wish wasn't a secret at all? What's that one thing you wish everybody watching or listening today knew?
If you're trying to build that business that's going to give you the time, money, freedom that you want, you cannot be afraid to put yourself out there. You cannot be afraid to shine. You cannot be afraid to let people see your thought leadership. You've got to be visible and credible to the world. It's one of the reasons why, as RTI Publishing developed, I realized it was much more than publishing books. It's about giving people the tool to get the visibility and the credibility they need. But you cannot be afraid to shine. I didn't get a chance to tell the other side of the story. Because I always felt so different than every other kid. I didn't have a mom. I was half black, half white in an all-white community. I didn't even have a black afro. I had a red afro. I was a head taller than every other kid. I got tired of being visible because I was not visible in a good way. And I decided I was going to become invisible. So I became perfectly average. Not that, I stuck out wherever I was, but I just tried to become invisible, and that actually hindered my whole entrepreneurship story. But when I decided to become visible and when I made sure I was credible, that's when things changed for me. That's when I became the extraordinary word ninja, and I was no longer afraid to shine. Do not be afraid to let people see what an amazing person you are. It is your gift to the world when you let them in.
Yeah. And what an advantage, what a gem, what an honor to have someone who can walk that with you, right? Having a mentor to walk alongside you, having someone who's been down that road. And I know for you that publishing is so much more than getting a book out there, but it's bringing someone into the light that they deserve. And I so appreciate that about your approach, what you do. And I deeply appreciate you coming on. Now, I know that some folks are listening and maybe they finally let themselves believe that this could be them, right? That they could step into that. How can they find more out about you and your work and even your podcast?
So the podcast is easy. It's the Author to Authority podcast. It's available on every major podcast app. You can also find the Author to Authority YouTube channel, all of the podcast episodes, including Scott's. Now, I had Scott on a little while ago, but it was an amazing episode. And Scott, you said something that at the end of the episode that just really captured me. And I think it's one of the essences of being a successful entrepreneur. And you said, enjoy the journey. Find the joy that is in front of you right now. And I listened to that and I thought, wow, because when you enjoy the journey, you want to keep it going. Yeah. When you're not enjoying the entrepreneurship journey, that's when it's tempting to quit. That's when it's hard. But you said, find the joy that is right in front of you. Oh, Scott, you have no idea how much that ministered to my heart. That's about awesome. Finding the joy. So first of all, you're going to want to go to the Author to Authority podcast. It's episode 450. So by the time this goes, you're probably going to have to scan back again a little bit or search for it. But I guarantee you it is an episode that you are going to want to listen to. So there is the podcast. If you wish to direct message me, connect with me on LinkedIn. It is Word Ninja Kim. And I will make sure that Scott has the link to the 7 questions to ask a publisher. That will be in the show notes. So those are the best ways to connect with me.
Well, Kim, thank you so much. We will get all those links in the show notes, so you guys can just go straight down and click on them right there. Once you're not driving, don't do it while you're driving, and you'll have that available. I highly recommend it. Again, having an opportunity to listen to some of the episodes, browse around Kim's site. It's just a phenomenal resource for entrepreneurs. Kim, thank you so much for being here. What an honor and a privilege. I deeply appreciate it. And for those of you watching and listening, you know that your time and attention mean the world to us. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I know I did, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Take care.